Welcome, everybody. We're going to begin here in a few minutes, but so good to see everyone, some familiar faces, and I hope everybody's doing okay.
Yes, I'm doing okay. Good to see you.
Hey, Francisco, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good to see you here. Hey, hi, Tara. Welcome, everybody. All right. Okay, so it is 5:30 Pacific time. I'm going to put the link to the PowerPoint in our chat so you all can have that. I will also share it at the end. I will share any other documents that we review together today with you as well. So anything that we cover today, you will have access to. It looks like we have about 9 of us here this evening. I expect a few more people to be joining. But we can go ahead and get started. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm seeing some friendly faces, which is so great. So tonight is the SOLS Graduate Student Writing Workshop. Today we are focusing on the literature review, and this can be a really stressful part of your research or part of an assignment to do. So hopefully by the end of this hour and a half with you, we are going to be feeling a little bit more confident, and maybe this is will be a little less scary. I remember when I was writing my lit review for my master's program, and it was, oh my goodness, it was the hardest part. So we're going to be focusing on purpose, organization, locating, analyzing, and writing tonight. My name is Professor Emily Packer. Please call me Emily. I use she, her pronouns. And it's so wonderful to see everybody today. Ooh, hello from New York. That's awesome. We're going to have a chance to introduce ourselves in a second. I would love to know where everybody is logging in from. Before we get started, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. As we are a community of the University of San Diego, we want to acknowledge that the land we gather on is the traditional and unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. We want to pay respect to the citizens of the Kumeyaay Nation, both past and present, and their continuing relationship to their ancestral lands. Today's workshop, we have our agenda and some of our slows as well. We're going to start off with a brief introduction. I just would love to hear what you all are working on, what questions you may have that can help me focus in on what I'm going to be explaining later on. We're going to do an overview of what the literature review is. So we want to make sure that everybody is starting from the same place. Steps before writing, because, you know, writing is only part of a literature review, writing an organization, and if we have time, we'll do a little bit of a group discussion. If we don't, that's not a problem. I'm going to be sharing my contact information with everyone, and you are welcome to contact me whenever you need to. So at the end of our hour and a half together, my hope is that you'll be able to tell us what a literature review is and understand the importance and place in research. grasp ways to write a literature review, get prepared to do that, and also understand how to structure in terms of writing and what this can look like. Literature reviews can vary. So we're going to be going over a certain framework today, really basic information that you can then put your own touches on. And I am happy to answer any and all questions as well. So welcome, welcome. Yes, I will put the slides here in our chat. I will also share a link to our shared folder with you all at the end, and so you can access any of the documents I go over. So really briefly, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Emily. I got my master's degree from USD through the Masters of TESOL program in 2015. And I'm currently a PhD student in the PhD in Education for Social Justice program, our second cohort. I see some cohort members tonight, so thank you all for coming. I also teach within SOL. So I teach the practicum course for our TESOL students, and I've worked very closely with them on their research. I do want to say that I'm an educator first, researcher second. I am sure that will start evening out a little bit throughout my career, but that is definitely where I'm coming from. My previous research has been in EIL, so English as an international language, and I am focusing on issues of equity and social justice within the ESL classroom at the moment. So let's take a few minutes, introduce yourself in the chat box, and these are some things that I'm going to be looking for. So if you've started your research, whether that is a dissertation, if it's your capstone project, or if it's, an assignment for your first year, what's your topic? If you've started your lit review, what are you struggling with, if anything? And if you haven't started quite yet, but maybe your professor has asked you to come to this, what are you curious about? If you don't want to introduce yourself, that's totally fine. This is absolutely optional. But if you don't mind sharing, this would be a great opportunity to do so. So we can take a few minutes to do this right now.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ricky Butler. I'm from New York. I am in the cohort 3 of the PhD program, Social Justice and Education. My first semester was just this past semester, and it was the first time I was doing a literature review of this type. It was very challenging. And my topic right now has to do with the relationship between educators and the mothers of Black students. And the biggest thing I found was that in a literature review, there's a lot of information about homeschool relationships. And I had to dig very, very deep to find specifics about relationships between Black parents, Black mothers in particular, with educators.
Thank you for sharing, Ricky, and welcome and hi from New York. I understand it's getting a little bit late over there, but thank you so much for joining us. And you touched on something important, is that you've had to dig for your research. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we continue. I remember writing my literature review for the first semester for the first year of the PhD program, and it was also challenging for me as well. I'm happy to sit and chat with anybody for your questions, but know that I am also doing this alongside of you all too. And so we're going to pin Ricky's comment about digging, and we're going to be able to think about and brainstorm ways to be able to do that, I think, kind of towards the middle. Thanks so much for sharing, Ricky, and welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it looks like a few of us have introduced ourselves in the chat as well. So Grace, welcome. Topic, literacy and correctional education for women. In cohort 1, perfect. So we have representation from all 3 cohorts. Great. Hi, Maddie. Nice. Not started research yet, but you started your lit review, struggling with paring down information. Oh my goodness, yes. That is such a difficult thing to do. But I always say that too much information is a wonderful place to start. It's easier to pare down than to build up sometimes. Thanks for sharing. Hey there, Molly. Perfect action research. I did AR as well. culturally responsive teaching and classroom participation. Organizing, awesome. So we're going to be talking about organizing, and hopefully you'll leave with a little bit of a better sense. But there's different ways to organize your lit review. So remember that I'll be providing a few examples, but this is your document. So I hope to provide some guidance, but definitely none of this is the absolute only option for you. Thank you for sharing. Hey, Trish, leadership PhD, wonderful. Belonging in groups dynamics, study on the relationship between institutional COVID-19 policies and student affairs. Woof, what a relevant topic. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Hey, Tara, welcome from Switzerland. Amazing. Researching compassion as a base for innovation and flourishing schools. Awesome. Very cool. No worries. A camera is not required. Absolutely not. Marnie, hi there. School to Prison Pipeline K through 12 Leadership Challenge. Oh, nice. The struggle is just becoming more familiar with the structure. Absolutely. And we will definitely go through that tonight. Wonderful. Hey, Valerie. Nice. Second year. Perfect. Self-awareness at undergraduate student leaders. Very cool. Adding more research to the lit review section of your writing. Yeah, I know that is super hard. It's hard figuring out what to add, where to add it sometimes, and we can explore that in depth tonight as well. Hi, Susan. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Assessing dialectic aspects of culturally sustained pedagogy in action. Very, very, very cool. Very cool. Thank you for sharing where you are as well. Welcome. So good to see you here. Hi, Maggie. Nice. Never done research before. I was in your boat as well. Totally been there, done that. AR, wonderful. Trauma-informed practices. Wow, that's amazing. Overly general and not connecting it to my research enough. Yes, we are definitely going to talk about that. Graduating this May, congratulations in advance. Overwhelmed with the timeline. I bet a lot of us can sympathize and empathize. So hopefully you leave feeling a little bit better by the end of tonight. Hi, Rachel. AR as well, very cool. Revision phase of your lit review, nice. Struggling with synthesis between topics and creating links and proper flow. How you can restore. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Welcome, Maisha. Academic benefits my students will have with the inclusion push-in model. Ooh, very interesting. More guidance with your literature review. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So it looks like we have a lot of overlapping concerns, which is great. And all of these concerns are very valid. They're very, very, very normal. A literature review can feel like this huge undertaking, especially since it's a dynamic document. It's ever changing. And it seems like a lot of times the more you research, the more you go back and change what you've been writing. Sometimes your research questions change alongside the growth of your own knowledge. And that makes it really beautiful, but it also makes it challenging and overwhelming, especially for some of us who are on a pretty tight deadline if we're graduating. So again, one of my not an explicit SOL, but SLO, but one of my goals for tonight is that everybody leaves feeling a little bit more confident and excited, possibly, about digging in and writing. So thank you so much for everyone who shared, and everyone who didn't, totally fine. And hopefully that this can be useful for you. If you have any questions, just drop them in the chat the chat box as we continue. We will also have time for questions at the end. So I'm going to jump right in. When I first started writing literature reviews, I felt that there was an expectation that I should already know what it is. And it made me feel really worried. And so I want to start with just basic, what is a literature review? For some of us, we might know this. And for others, this may be completely new information. But let's just start with the basics and build up. So a literature review, let's break it down by word. Literature refers to the collection of published materials on a particular topic of research. This can include books, Journals, this should be of quote academic value, and I'm putting those in quotes because that can be subjective. For a lot of times, your professors expect it to be peer-reviewed information. I do want to say though, this is not limited to peer-reviewed books and journal articles. Okay, so always check with your professor and see if there are other alternatives that you can include. For example, possibly dissertation papers. Those are not peer reviewed, but if they have been defended and accepted, your professors might allow you to use those. So I always encourage you to push the boundaries of what that means, because we want to include a lot of different sources from a lot of different writers, authors, and that might not look in a traditional academic sense. So if you find something that you might want to use, make sure you have that conversation. Don't immediately discount it. And to review is kind of what we get a lot pretty stuck on. So in this aspect, to review means to figure out what has been established, discredited, and accepted in your field of study. So we have a question. So how do we know if a book has been peer reviewed? So usually we can look and see who published it, when it was published. And if you have any questions, you can always chat with the librarian at Copley, or you can ask your professor. So a lot of times, you just look at your publisher, the publisher of the book, and you also look at the sources that the book uses. So hopefully that clarifies that a little bit. So, but that's where I'm saying, check with your professors, because non-traditional elements like memoirs or autobiographies, these can be used in certain formats if it really depends on your assignment and what the literature review is connected to. But traditionally peer reviewed means that it has been accepted by a journal and published by a reputable publisher. Hopefully that answered your question. And review is the key word here, right? That was the question that just came up. What does this mean? And so when you sit down and you're sifting through the information that is related to your topic or your research questions, you are reviewing it. And for us, some of us, we feel a little bit not as confident to do this. What are we looking for? How do I know if it is a quote good source? How do I know if this is something I want to include? And you want to look at what's been established in relation to your topic. Sometimes the best bet is to ask your professor and say, this is my topic. Do you know any of the seminal authors? And you can build up from there. Or do you know anybody within USD who has been researching within the same field? And you can use your social capital, the people that that you have relationship with within the school, to help you figure out what direction you go down. Discredited as well is pretty important, because you want to make sure that you're not going down a road that has already been discredited, and accepted. Areas of controversy or conflict can absolutely be included. Actually, and we're going to talk about this later on as well, you want to include a diverse opinion set, and you want to include pushback as well, because if you don't, it looks like you're picking and choosing what you're including in your writing just to support your potential argument. A literature review is not you trying to prove something. Your literature review is basically like a cheat sheet for your readers before you move on to your research, to say, hey, this is the support, this is the evidence that has informed what I'm choosing to do afterwards. Okay, so you're thinking of it almost like one of the first movies in a sequence. It's going to be pretty hard to watch the 7th Harry Potter movie if you haven't watched the first ones. So you want to think about your literature review as one of those prequel movies. Hey, let's talk about the basics, the important information, so that you can then understand what comes after, which is your research. You want to include problems and issues, emerging new trends and new approaches, and you want to make sure that you focus on how your research extends, builds upon, or departs from previous research. Because if your research is trying to include, or your research is trying to fill a gap, right? If there's no gap, then what's your research going to be doing? If there's no gap, you tend to be repeating what has already come before. So remember that you are the experts in your research. You will have things that make sense to you, but you want to be able to provide your readers for your research with the basics so that they're able to make sense of your research. It needs to be related back to your research questions. We'll talk about that in a second. Here are some of the key words that we're going to be talking about today. A literature review identifies, evaluates, and synthesizes the relevant literature within a particular field of research. Identify, to find. We're going to talk about steps, how you do that. Evaluate, so figure out what works best for you and your research, and synthesize. Now we're kind of moving away from summarization into synthesis. And I'm going to give you some examples. Now, I know I'm kind of breaking the typical unspoken rule that don't put a lot of information on the slides. I will put the slides in the chat again. You can always refer to these in your own time as well. But let's just go over the basics. So a literature review shares with the reader the themes or results of closely related studies. Now, some of the professors have shared with me that we're having a little bit of a hard time determining what is a theme and what is a method and what is a study. So a theme, think of a theme as an umbrella, okay? The theme is what is overarching, and different studies are under the umbrella. So the different studies that you're going to be citing falls under the theme. They are going to be synthesized, so woven together to produce a theme or to produce an idea. So instead of delving into each study individually, we actually want to look at what the studies are saying in general. And from those, we find our themes. And we're going to look at how this is cited. Think about your research as adding to an ongoing discussion. So your research and your literature review relates to a study of larger ongoing dialogue. So you're going to be talking about, hey, where did this come from? What's happening in today's world, especially with the age of COVID and digital learning and teaching. And we want to think about what's relevant because we've had some serious shifts in the last few years. And it provides a framework for establishing the importance of the study. So at the end of your lit review, you're basically explaining why your research is needed in the conclusion. Because remember, we want to focus on the fact that there is a gap that needs to be filled. Now, I use the word synthesize a lot. And we want to synthesize other people's ideas, but we are the ones presenting it. So other people have already published. They've already published books. They've already published articles. We're going to be taking those and using them to prove that we need to include our research in this dialogue. So we don't need to explain the different books and the different articles that we use. That's why we have a reference page. And that's why we cite our information, because our readers can always go and read those. But our literature review is explaining what is already out there, but we are the ones crafting it. However, we're not adding new contributions quite yet. Okay, we're the ones crafting the literature to explain why our research is needed, but we're not adding anything. That's what our research is for. Okay, that comes at a later time for you. The literature review is a guide, and it's a guide for you, and it's a guide for your readers. Now, it's important that your literature review is pretty exhaustive. You're exhausted after doing it, but exhaustive. Because if it's not, you lose a little bit of credibility. Now, I heard a lot of you talk about important subjects like critically relevant pedagogy, and you want to make sure that you're including some of the seminal authors, the really important people that have done the groundbreaking work. Now, you also want to include people who are doing the work now. So you're not just going to talk about what's been happening over the last 20 years. You want to make this relevant. But if you skip and you don't reference somebody who's like a key person within your topic, then someone reading might say, huh, that's interesting. I wonder why. I wonder why they didn't do this. So remember that your credibility as a researcher also comes from your ability to craft a pretty thorough literature review. So no pressure. We're going to talk about how to do that. And I've mentioned this a few times already. Your lit review identifies a gap in the literature that your subsequent research will attempt to fill. Because if there's no gap, what's the purpose of your research? You want to be adding to the conversation, not repeating information already out there. And I hope that's liberating in some way. I hope that's exciting in some way, that you're adding to this. You've recognized a gap, and that's what you're working towards. Now, before we move on, we want to make sure that we understand the difference between summary and synthesis, okay? This is something that we see at the Writing Center all the time, is that we kind of get stuck on summary when our academic writing needs to be moving towards synthesis. Because as I've talked about before, we don't want to delve into a study paragraph by paragraph. We want to look at a bunch of studies, weave them together, and produce themes or ideas. A summary is a recap of the important information, okay? But a synthesis weaves together information from multiple sources. Now, I'm going to go back to the movie theme, okay? So if I watched, the first Avengers movie, and I'm sharing the summary, I'm sharing what's happening with a friend, that friend now knows a lot about one movie, okay? The first Avengers movie. Now, if I sit down and I tell her about my top 8 favorite action movies, and I explain how all of them have this hero character and they all have this interesting like childhood background trauma and blah, 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 then she walks away with knowledge about 8 different movies, but overarching ideas that link all of these movies together. And she has a better understanding of how each of these movies are connected and produce an overarching theme. Now, where is she more knowledgeable? She's super knowledgeable in the first example, but it's only about one movie. And she wants to understand the theme within topic. And so that's what you want to do. Because if we're producing an argument and we say that, well, one person said this, it's actually not very strong. But if we're producing an argument and we say, hey, this is what has been said by 6 different people, this is what's been proven by 6 different research studies, that's a lot stronger. So remember, in your writing, we might fall in love with one article, one research study, but we want to find related articles that produce the same or similar ideas within a theme. So again, we are moving towards synthesis and we're moving away from summary. I know this is hard to see, and I apologize for that, but hopefully when you access the slides in your own time, it's a little clearer. So this is an example of summary, okay? So this is from some of my reading from my first year in my PhD program. And there is a time and place for summary, absolutely. In a literature review, however, it's not usually the most appropriate place. But if we're explaining historical background, if we're delving into one author in particular, that's fine. But this is an example in writing. We see Moses and Cobb 2001, and we explain what Moses and Cobb have found. Bob Moses' Algebra Project. And we see that this is a little bit of the tail end of a paragraph about this one source. Okay, this is summary. We then look down here as well. We see Tate, and then we see a direct quote. We can use direct quotes in our lit review, but we really want to use them sparingly. Okay, again, it's because it's stronger to produce something that is supported by multiple people rather than a direct quote from someone else. We also don't want to really include a ton of direct quotes because our literature review should be written by us. If you're using a ton of direct quotes, then why don't I just go to that article and read it? We want to make sure that you are the author of this document. So these are examples of what summary looks like. In contrast, this is what synthesis looks like, okay? So we see that we have a statement, critical race theory emerged from critical legal studies as a means to problematize and theorize the roles that race and racism play in education, politics, and economy, legal matters, and everyday life. Great. That is a strong sentence. And we see that we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 citations. So we see that 4 different authors or groups of authors have said something similarly. So this author has synthesized these authors' ideas to produce this sentence. But the author of the article wrote this, so it's still in their own words. You see down here as well, the next sentence, 1, 2, 3 different citations here. Okay, so this is synthesis. This is showing us that you have done a great amount of reading and that you have pulled ideas from these articles and found themes or common ideas from them. This is super strong writing. Okay, this is what we want to see in literature reviews. Okay, so before we move on, let's talk about what it is and is not. So literature review is a critical evaluation of sources related to your research topic. Okay, I'm going to use an example that I used to use when I would teach kids. If your research topic is your palm, everything in your lit review has to be directly related. Okay, so each paragraph is your finger. Your topic is your palm. It needs to be directly related. Okay, I should be able to read the first sentence of each of your paragraphs and be able to see clearly how it's related to your topic. Okay, your lit review is also a great place to define key technical context related terms. We do that in our intro. It's a synthesis of a range of sources, a theoretical or conceptual framework that's aligned with your research question, and a place to identify the gap in the literature. It is not a descriptive summary of each and every text. Okay, no, it is not. It is not presented in a list where you discuss your texts in turn. Okay, so you do not just, we call it a laundry list of our sources. We don't want that. Remember, we want synthesis. It is not a compilation of all materials related to your research field, regardless of its relevance to your project. Again, it's usually easier to start with a lot of information and pare it down. And that just takes a lot of reading. And we're going to talk about that. And it's not simply a collection of texts that you think are interesting. And this is hard to let go of because sometimes you'll find articles or books that you go, wow, this speaks to me. I love this. And it might not be appropriate for the assignment you're working on, and you would have to table it. That's okay. I make a list of the articles and books that I've read that I found really interesting, but probably not related to the topic that I'm focusing on. And I revisit that list because our research evolves. So maybe a few weeks down the road, you go, oh my gosh, I remember reading that one thing. And now I think it's appropriate to include it. Don't try to force it. Okay. If it doesn't relate it to your research, that's okay. Just save it for a rainy day. That rainy day might be this semester, and it might be in a year or so. Now let's talk about the lit review steps. Again, this is one way to do and to get prepared for a literature review. These are recommendations. People write, people learn, people read really, really differently, and that you have the freedom to do this. This is not by law, okay? This is just to provide you with some ideas. Now, there are 3 parts, in my opinion, there's 3 major parts about a lit review. The first one's locating the literature, which a few of us had concerns about. The second part is analyzing it or reviewing it. And the final part is writing it. Sounds easy, right? So your literature review steps, I've created 7 just to kind of get us started. Now we're going to go through each of them. Again, this is something that works for me and previous students of mine, but if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. Take and choose what speaks to you and what works for you as a researcher. Now, to really begin, we are assuming you have a topic and we are assuming you have research questions. Just remember, your research questions are dynamic. They're living things. So you can continue tweaking them, changing them, evolving them as you go about your research. That's normal. That's fine. Now, once you have this, you want to start brainstorming some key words because that can really help us in our research portion. So when we jump on the Copley Library website, when we jump on Google Scholar, when we go to all of our different databases, we want to make sure we have some keywords that we want to plug in. Now, if we're stuck, I really just suggest you brainstorming with a friend or a peer at USD, just a friend outside of USD, whoever, and your professors. Totally, very, very, very much encourage you to do that. And if your current professor is not within the realm of your research, they may and most likely have people that they know that they could connect you with. And you say, hey, these are the key terms that I've come up with. Do you have any other suggestions for me? Research is humbling. We need to ask for help. If we don't, then we have the weight of our research on our own shoulders. But we have so many support systems at USD. Please use them. The librarians are magicians. Please, please, please contact the library. They are incredible. Okay. So they can help you out with this. Now we want to find some keywords and then we can start plugging it in and trying to find relevant research. The second step takes a lot of time. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of skimming at this point, because if we find an article that really speaks to us, we want to then check out the reference page, because if this article, has a lot of great ideas you want to include, this can be used almost as a cheat sheet as well. So you can check out who they have referenced. Then you'll start seeing people's names coming up over and over and over again. So if you're seeing somebody's name and you're like, oh my goodness, wow, Ladson Billings. Okay, I really need to look into her a little bit more. I really want to see what she's been working on because she is cited in everything that's speaking to me. That's a great resource. So searching for appropriate journals and books. Again, appropriate is subjective. Okay, so I would say that journals and books that are related to your topic and your research questions. But yes, if you find studies that contradict, maybe your assumptions, please include them. Okay, remember your literature review is it's summarizing what's out there, and if there are studies out there that contradict what you're doing, include it because it shows that you've done your reading. It shows that you're thinking about the big picture and you're not just picking and choosing what you're including in your lit review. And that can inform your research, definitely. Now, you say that you've gone through, you've found some keywords, you found a bunch of articles, you've probably skimmed them, you probably haven't read them word for word. I'm not going to tell you how many articles to have because that's totally up to you. Then you start actually organizing them, and you're thinking about how you want them to be organized. And one way to think about this is finding the keywords from other people's articles and books. So how are they phrasing things? Maybe it diverges from what you've been using. What are the time frame of the studies? If you're finding studies that are like 30 years ago, that's okay, but you also want to find stuff that's been happening recently as well. Same thing, vice versa. If you've only found things within the last year, hey, why is that? And has there been some previous studies and articles from a little bit longer? Try to figure out the time frame because we really want to show a diverse set of literature and organize the materials in however works for you. A lot of people used to print things out, we are all about saving the trees here, but if that works for you, then go for it. But also just try to play around with organization digitally too. Figure out what works for you and talk to your peers. How are you organizing this? What sources are you using to do that? How far back should you go? Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on your topic and your questions. So if your topic is pretty recent and it has to do with COVID, it has to do with digital learning, which isn't necessarily super recent, then you really want to focus on, what's been happening within the past few years, but then dig and see if there's a basis of information that you're talking about. If you're talking about participation, you can give a little bit of an overview from a little bit farther back. But if you're talking about something that has been really well established, and you've seen the evolution of the idea over years and years, the last 30 years or so, make sure to include that, and that's okay. Some professors have pretty strong opinions about this. And so you might just want to double check with your professor and say, hey, I found this book from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. What do you think about including it? A lot of times that just establishes the timeline, and that's really useful. But if all of your sources are from the 80s, then you probably want to include something recent too. So my long story long, my suggestion is to include a variety, but it depends on your topic. 100% depends on your topic. Okay, so organization. So what works for me is, and we're going to get to this step next, is to create what's called a literature map, and think about the themes. You can also, in this situation here, you can just create a lot of folders, whatever works for you on your computer, print them out, how physically move them, write out a little map for yourself, whatever works for you. If you're a visual learner, if you're a kinesthetic learner, you have to physically move it around. This is totally up to you. Remember, this is not necessarily how you're going to organize it in your writing. It absolutely might be the basis for it. But here we just want to figure out how is this working together? What story is being told? Afterwards, we want to skim the article and annotate. Okay. So I have an article here. I don't know if you can see this, but there's lots of writing, there's highlighting, and this is what works best for me. Online, digitally, do whatever you need to do. But when you're annotating, you want to be annotating with a purpose. Okay. So thinking about these questions can help you get going. What assumptions are the researchers making about your topic? What methodologies do they use? Okay, testing procedures, subjects, materials tested. Evaluate and synthesize the research findings and the conclusions. Okay, what are the conclusions of the articles? Are there overlap? Are there divergent ideas? What is happening? Who are the experts in the field? What are the conflicting theories? And think about the popularity of the theories. Are they changing over time? Have they remained the same? So make sure, I will show you an example of a literature map in a second. Perfect question. So when you're annotating, think about what you want to find. So because sometimes we annotate and then we wind up with so much information, we don't know how to sift through it. So before you get going on your annotation, think about, okay, what am I looking for specifically? Put a frame around your reading in your annotation. And this is dependent upon what you're searching for. Now, when you've identified some useful literature, it's not all going to happen at one time. It's an ongoing process. You can design what's called a literature map. And this can be really helpful to just see how all of this is connected to one another. Because remember, since we want to focus on synthesis and not summarization, we want to see what works together. We're weaving it together. I'm going to say the word weave way too many times. So a literature review map, there's lots of options. You can just jump on Google Image, type in literature review map, and see how different people have organized their literature. So let's just take a look at this for a second. So the overarching idea here for this person is procedural justice in organizations. Now we look down and we see immediately that there are 3 overarching themes: justice perception formation, justice effects, justice and organizational change. So you said, okay, we have these 3 kind of big themes that then are broken down into even smaller parts. So then if we look at justice perception formation, we have 5 parts, right? Motives, climates, voice, organizational structures, and knowledge. And you'll see that, for example, for voice, we have 3 different sources. But for the rest, we have 1. So if I'm looking at this, and this is a great starting place, and you say, oh, well, I really want to learn more about motives. I have 1 source currently. Then you can specify your search. And you can Google, justice perception formation, motives. You can go to Tyler 1994 and see who they cite. And so this can show you, hey, where is my research robust? Where do I have multiple sources supporting an idea? And where is it a little bit thin and I want to bulk it up a little bit. And this can really help you narrow down the actual search that you do. And then you can see that there's parts of it that are connected to, it's not just a completely perfect web. You can see that a few are connected to multiple. You look at the justice effects, outcomes, trust, organizational support, organizational citizenship behavior, and all of these are connected, and then trust and organizational citizenship is connected as well. So looking at it like this, you say, okay, interesting. How can I write about this? Or what path do I want to take when I write? Do I want to divide trust and organizational citizenship, or do I want to possibly combine it? And so looking at it this way can help you also move things around. Now, it doesn't look like it here, but sometimes our sources lend themselves to multiple themes. So we have Tyler over here with motives, but maybe Tyler also could support relocation over injustice and organizational change. So then you can add that here or show an arrow, because we don't have, once we find a source, it doesn't have to be stuck on one theme or idea. Lots of times we find a plethora of ideas in one source that can lend itself to multiple themes throughout your literature review. So this is an example of what this could look like. Here's another one. So this one looks pretty different. So remember, these are just examples. Create something that makes sense to you. So we see that in here we have 4 major parts. We have history, social innovation, participatory design, and scenario planning. We see it's in a circular organizational design. And then we see, okay, how are all these related? We see this, that participatory design comes over here, which is, I'm actually not sure if you can see my cursor, but we can see that it's not just over here with methods where we have 3 clear sources. That's just on its own. There's a little bit more weaving together on the bottom right-hand corner. And so we can see that in our literature review, we might want to organize it that way. It's not all super, okay, thank you. It's not all very, I guess, clear where one equals the other. Over here, there's more connections. And so this is another way for us to think about it. Your literature map is the first step in thinking about your organization for your lit review. Okay, and so when you look at your literature map, you can start thinking, okay, what are the body paragraphs of my literature review? Why would I put history first and social innovation second? Does it make more sense for social innovation to be the first body paragraph? And you can start reasoning with yourself and thinking about that. Now, this is where we start drafting summaries of the most relevant articles. Now, this is not part of your lit review. Okay, I want to make that very clear, because remember, for our lit review, we synthesize, we don't summarize. So for this step, you really want to make sure you do a little bit, even just a post-it note summary for each of your, post-it note size summary for each of your articles. So that way we can go back and we don't have to skim the whole article. We can just look at the summary. It's a little cheat sheet for ourselves. Because for most of us, we're working on literature reviews for weeks. So you might find an article at the very beginning that is amazing, but 4 weeks down the line, you come back to it and you go, oh, why did I choose this again? What was that most important point? And so looking at your summary can really help remind you and save time. But in your summaries, I'm going to give you a really great pointer that's worked for me, is make sure you make connections between that article and other articles. Okay, so you can say, oh, Packer 2022 said this was related to Butler 2019 because da 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 da. And that way you can say, okay, now I remember, oh, that was connected, so I can focus on my synthesis. Because remember, we are trying to figure out how sources are related to one another to produce ideas and themes. Yes, I'm going to skip that actually. So Finally, for step 7, so this is really where you want to start thinking about the structure of your writing. So this is where you go with your literature review outline. Actually, hold on, let me go back. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you guys. Okay, so for one of my classes last year, our professors asked us to create research notes. And if you're in the PhD for social justice, you have been asked to do this as well. And this was really, really helpful. Okay, so this was super, super helpful for me, is when you are reviewing your articles, you want to think about what each of your articles or books are talking about with specific information. So I just wanted to share this with you in case this speaks to you. So, choose words to describe the article. What's the theme? What's the background? What's the purpose? What's the research questions? Lots of information about each article. You would not do this in the beginning when you're amassing your articles in your research. You would do this once you have decided on using a specific source. Because if you did this at the beginning, this would take a ton of time. But once you've narrowed down some key sources that you definitely will use, this is when you can really kind of start dissecting them and taking them apart and figuring out if they have overlaps and similarities. So this is just one way to help you out with that. Okay, hey Marnie, thank you. And this takes a lot of time. As you all know, literature reviews take a long time. So I just wanted to give you guys this example so that if it's helpful for you, but if it's not, don't worry about it. Okay. Sometimes I write notes on my slides and then I forget why I wrote them. Okay, so before we get to writing, I really encourage you all to create an outline. Okay, this outline will serve as a map and a guide for you in your writing process. You can change your outline. You should evolve it and should evolve with you and your reading and your writing. But your outline can really help you if you get stuck in the writing process. Because I don't know about you, but a lot of times I get really stuck at the beginning of my writing. And then sometimes I go off into tangents in different directions and I have a hard time looping myself back. Remember, every part of your lit review must be related to your research topic. Okay. Remember, that is super important. If it's not, that's okay. I know sometimes getting rid of paragraphs is super painful for us, but just copy paste them, put them somewhere else. Don't delete them forever. Maybe it'll be appropriate for a different assignment. But creating an outline can really help you find your way back to the purpose of your writing. Okay, and now we're getting to the actual writing portion. Before I move into the writing portion, does anybody have, I'll go back to these steps that I've provided. Does anybody have any questions that you have about the 7 steps we just went through? Or what questions do you have? Color coding can be really helpful. Yeah, that's a great question. So when you color code based on potential topic, I think for me that works very well. I'm a visual learner and it helps me connect the articles or the books that connect them to help me synthesize later on. Yeah. Oh, you have during research. Perfect. Yeah, absolutely do it during the lit review because the lit review is research too, right? So you're researching what's out there. And so thinking about how they are connected can really help you find outliers as well. So if you have, if you're color coding, then you can see what's kind of hanging out on its own. And including outliers is very important in your lit review too. Thanks, Susan. Sometimes too verbose. Well, we can come back to this. And remember, if something doesn't help you in these steps, leave it. Okay. But a lot of my students have trouble writing the lit review because they haven't done, because they rush through the getting to the writing section, which I did as well. And I still do. Absolutely. I can talk to you all about the structure all day long, but I definitely find myself skipping through this sometimes because it takes a lot of time. And so I think making peace with that as well as can be really helpful and saying, this is going to take me time and that's okay. Remember that if you read an article and you say, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with me, why did I just read that? You never know. Save it, create a summary for yourself that might be useful down the road. All of this is learning is so helpful. Okay, so let's talk about writing because this is hard. First of all, I do want to say that I think we are all here to challenge the traditional academic way of writing. I think we all have our own voices, and that's important. I think sometimes when I read these articles, I get overwhelmed with comparing my writing to previously published authors. But I think that it's very important for us to all realize that our contributions are so important. We come from very different writing backgrounds. And so we don't need to echo the people we're reading in terms of style. We probably need to, spell things correctly sometimes. But when we're writing our lit review, I want us to be focused on portraying our ideas more so than, quote, sounding traditionally academic. Okay. So I know this is being recorded and people might disagree with me, but I think that's really important. We want to focus on portraying our ideas because that's what's that's what's changing. That's what's the important part. And keeping your own voice is amazing. Now, there is a structure to a lit review. Okay, there is a loose framework that we do want to follow. And it starts with an intro paragraph or paragraphs, including body paragraphs, and then we do have a conclusion. So I'm going to go through basic bullet points that should be included in these. Now, for our writing, use evidence. Even if you're writing about something that is near and dear to your heart that you experience every day, your lit review is not where you share your own ideas unless you're published, and then you can cite yourself. But you want to use evidence in your assumptions, in your statements, okay? Because if you're just sharing your opinion, that's not the best place for it. So, but if you have a strong opinion, go find support for it. Go and find articles and everything that support what you say. Be selective. We've talked about it. Don't include everything. Try to figure out what is directly connected to your research topic. Please use quotes sparingly. We want to hear your voice. Synthesize our information. Remember, we're weaving them together. Keep your own voice and be cautious about paraphrasing because, we come with bias innately. So paraphrasing can be a little bit hard. So have somebody read over it who's familiar and make sure that you're not accidentally seeing something that's not there. Revise, revise, revise. We're not getting married to certain sentences, certain paragraphs. They are all works in progress. Now, our lit review intro paragraph should be an exciting place to start. Okay, this intro paragraph is where you are introducing the topic of your research to your readers. This is such an important part of your lit review. Now, let's talk about some things that should be included in it. Most importantly, no matter how common, quote unquote, you think your topic is, you have to define it. Okay, and you have to define it so that anybody reading it knows what you are thinking. Because when you say family, for example, like family matters, that might mean something to different people. We all come with our own background. So you want to define what you mean. Family matters means X. So most importantly, first and foremost, define what you are talking about, regardless of how common you think. Don't assume that everybody has the same definition that you do. Talk about the importance of the topic. Generalize. You can generalize what work has already been done. If there's any controversies, you can include that there. You can also include it in your body paragraphs. may provide background and history of topic. I have an asterisk there because a lot of times people actually include the history of a topic in their first body paragraph. Usually because it's more robust than what we would put in our intro. You may include organizational pattern of your body, of your body paragraphs. I'm going to show you an example of that, but you definitely want to include a generalized thesis statement. Okay, so your intro paragraph is defining what you're going to be talking about, briefly relay why it's important, why you're talking about it, and possibly give some background if you don't do it in your first body paragraph, and conclude with your thesis statement. Now, this is from some of my students at USD. Please don't try to read all of this. This is just highlighting some examples of what we just talked about. So, okay, immediately they tell us the population they're going to be talking about. They talk to us about what they're going to be focusing on, open enrollment. It says the literature on assessment is lacking. So this could be here, or this could also be appropriate in our conclusion. And then their thesis statement is at the bottom. This literature review defines open enrollment and how its components relate to aspects of second language acquisition theory and assessment methodologies. And so this is where we're kind of explaining the purpose of the lit review. Here we talk about, again, a social issue, influx of immigration, translation services, a term that they use, language brokering. Then after it, we say we see the body of literature on language brokering has said pretty much its negative and positive consequences. So we're summarizing the literature that's out there. And then again, the thesis statements at the bottom. This literature will go deeper into the themes found across bodies of research to give context for the study, as well as analyze the personal attributes that recent literature has been identifying for language brokering. Now, these are from a few years ago. So APA 7 has made changes. So if you're seeing things that you're like, well, this isn't proper APA. This is from a few years ago when we were using APA 6. Here again, classroom research, how to support student development. Now this person I highlighted here because they used I. And so in our writing, whether we use the first person is pretty specific to what your professor expects of you. So I would double check with your professor. This person's professor was totally fine with them using first person. I have found that most of my professors try to encourage us not to use that. It really depends on the expectations of the assignment. So I would just check with your professor. Yep, so for this reason, I selected research on theoretical constructs. So you want to be really direct in your introduction, okay? What are you talking about? What have you found so far? Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. APA 7 does. I still would check with your specific professor who you're turning your research into. Yeah, I think that I think it's wonderful to use the first person. But I'm not assessing your work. So I would double check with them and just make sure it's okay. But I think it's very empowering to do that. And I'm going to show you another example of a full literature review here in a second. So we have our body paragraphs. Now your introduction paragraph, I hope that you have fun with this, and I hope that it gives you confidence, because this is really where you are first introducing your reader to your topic and explaining its importance. Have anybody in your life read over it, because if it doesn't make sense for them, then you need to tweak it. You're not writing necessarily specifically for people who are experts in that field, right? We want to make our writing accessible to anybody who's reading it. And so I always have my husband read over one of my friends who's outside to make sure that what I'm saying makes sense, because sometimes we get so deep into our research that we use jargon that we don't even realize we're using. So we want to make sure we're defining those key terms there. Now, our body paragraphs are where we tend to get lost, right? This is where we have so much information we want to include. We have so many great points we want to make sure we mention, and we sometimes have a hard time figuring out how to relay that. Now, there are different ways we can organize our literature review. Most of the time, I've seen students within our programs organize our literature review body paragraphs thematically. Okay, that means that we've gone through the literature, we have found common ideas, common themes that are supported by multiple sources, and then we want to put these themes in order. Now, how you put those themes in order is up to you. We tend to use what's called order of importance. And of course, that is subjective. So, what makes sense to you might not make sense to somebody else. But we want to think about it. I want to encourage you all to think about what informs the next point. What do I need to know first to best understand what comes next? So sometimes people want to put the most important, flashiest idea first because it really draws the reader in. That's fine. But it's really important that we make sure that you have shared with us enough information to understand that point. So think of it in terms of what I say first informs next, what comes next. What I say next informs what comes third. So think about it like that. It's not necessarily chronologically, although you can definitely organize it that way if that makes sense for your research topic. Instead, think about what does the reader need to know? Okay. It's very important that you use headings and subheadings. That's one of the number one suggestions professors give to me to cover in this in this workshop is to make sure that we talk about headings and subheadings. They can be taken from your lit review maps and outlines. I'm going to show you an example. We want to make sure to synthesize our sources, of course. Note major themes, topics, important trends, and any findings. And then we really want to make sure that our topics lead or prepare our reader to read our next research or to understand why there is a gap in the literature. So for a lot of us, our lit reviews are just going to be an assignment that can exist on its own. But for many of us, we're working towards something. We're working towards our capstone project or dissertation. We're working towards actually conducting research. So you want to make sure that what you're including is informing the work that you're about to do. Yep, this is where we tend to get the most lost. So please, that's why it's important to do some organizing before you get writing. So if that means a literature review map, if that means an outline, if that means putting all your sources on the floor and physically, moving them around, whatever works for you, but have something to double check yourself, so that when you're writing, you can kind of ground yourself in something that's already been thought out. If that doesn't work for you and free writing is how you write and then you organize after, go for it. But we remember every paragraph needs to be directly related back to our topic, and it needs to be clearly related back to our topic. Yep, this is pretty much, I've mentioned all of this. Yes. So something that I do want to mention is that I use the term operationalizing constructs. So in your research questions, you're going to have constructs. Okay, so that can, if you say something, how does the culture of a K through 12 school do X? You want to operationalize culture, which means define it. Okay, explain what you mean by that. And we talked about that in our intro, but you also want to make sure that you're doing that throughout your body paragraphs as well. I got feedback on my paper from last semester that I used the term essentialization without defining it. And that was really important for me. I needed to go back and define that for my reader, even though I knew that my target audience would most likely understand. Again, we think about who's reading it, and we want to make sure that we're not assuming knowledge, that we're actually providing it. Okay, so I'm actually going to go through our concluding paragraph and then show us a lit review instead of showing us the lit review after our body paragraphs, because I think this will make a little bit more sense. So our concluding paragraph, we need to make sure we have one, first of all. I know sometimes we get to the end of our body paragraphs and we're so excited we're there that we almost forget to conclude. Your concluding paragraph is the final paragraph in your literature review, and it's very important because this is where you explicitly state that there is a gap in the research. So think about it this way: your whole lit review has been sharing information with the reader about what's out there. And then your conclusion is saying, okay, now that you know all of this, we're still missing this part. There's a gap. The research doesn't address this. The research might address CRT in K through 12, but it doesn't necessarily address it in secondary schooling. So we want to focus on that. You want to be explicit. This is really kind of the so what part. You've read through the rest of the lit review, you get to the conclusion, you go, so what? Why should I care about this? And you explain, hey, this is the gap, this is why it's important, and this is what my research is going to attempt to fill. So I am going to jump back into our shared folder. And I am going to make sure that you all have access to this. Okay, thank you. Done. And we are just going to look at a couple pretty short lit reviews, okay? And this is, for full disclosure, this one I wrote last semester and I received feedback on it. And so I feel confident sharing this with you. I wanted to share with you something that I've written, not because it's the best of the best. It's definitely not. All writing needs improvement somehow, but I want, just because it's been reviewed by a USC professor, and I want to make sure that what I'm sharing with you is accessible. Sometimes looking at lit reviews from published authors seems a little overwhelming, and you can Google those. So I want to share with you something that I wrote last semester. And I just want to, first of all, and it's very short. So I want to just look at the structure. Okay. So firstly, we want to make sure that we're including headers and subheaders for our organization. So if you just eyeball this, and please don't read word for word. If you're just eyeballing this, this is the introduction. You see, it's not that long. It's about 4 sentences. But I want to draw your attention to the last sentence. Okay. So it says, this literature review will provide insight into the necessity of moving past cultural initiatives. So I explained I kind of summarized the organization of the literature review. I was really resistant to doing that when I first started writing. I thought it was kind of repetitive, but this is a way to help make your organization clear to you and to your reader. I also, since my focus is about equity literacy, I discuss how I immediately define what I mean by it. Okay, you can see that I synthesize, although it is Gorski and Sawal over and over. It's from different articles. And so you can see that I synthesized. I did not use a direct quote because I still want to use my own words and my own writing. Then we have our heading. So my first theme, or my first idea, second one, third one, and then this is my concluding paragraph. As I said, this is super short. This is part of a much larger assignment. And so in conclusion, equity literacy, you don't have to put in conclusion. This is just for me, for my organization's sake. And then I say at the end, educators would benefit from learning about how to move equity literacy from a conceptual framework into practice and the outcomes that derive from such implementation. So this is kind of my gap. I'm saying, hey, we need to learn more about this. We need to figure this out. Okay. I also generalize. So I say this research explains, which means that the research I did, generally speaking, it's not a specific article or anything like that. So again, these are just key, these are the key points. The key points into what we are. Sorry, my computer's just connecting to my. So this is just an example, but again, this focuses on a short lit review that's part of a broader
assignment. Yes, okay. So we went through this for organization. Let me see how much time. Perfect. So what I would love for us to do, it looks like we have about 18 people left in our workshop tonight. So what I would like us to do is just quickly, we're going to get into groups and we're going to be talking for about 7 minutes. And I would like you to talk about this with your group if you don't mind. Don't need to turn on your camera, don't need to do anything like that. What will you adjust or do moving forward based on the information presented to you today? And then what questions do you have for me or your professors? And so if you are in group number 1, you can you can add to this slide. If you guys don't want to add to the slide, that's totally fine. I will be putting this in our chat again. There you go. And we're just going to be talking for about 6 or so minutes just with some of our colleagues, just to hash out what we learned today and what questions we might still have. Okay. All right, let me put you in. And if you prefer not to add anything to the slides, that's okay. I just want to make sure we at least get a chance to chat about it. Okay. No, this is too many. Okay, sorry, 1 second. Okay, perfect. I am going to open our rooms now. Okay, everyone. So welcome back. I think that we have some great ideas written down in the slides that I'm just going to end by addressing. So a lot of us in the beginning of the workshop had questions about organization and how to figure out what information to provide, to include, and what information to leave out. And so let's look at what you all learned and questions you still have. So group one said that they learned about making a graphic organizer for mapping and outlining. Yes, I swear this, you know, how my brain works and visually, this has been so useful. I've asked my master's students to do the same thing, and it has been helpful in just thinking through the connections. Because remember, your lit review is so based on making connections between ideas. Visual imagery of themes as I add new articles, absolutely. Remember, your themes are the umbrella. It's the overarching idea. Your articles are what support it. So none of your paragraphs throughout your lit review should be about one article only. It should be about a theme that you find. Okay, so group number two, spend more time on the planning portion. Yes, absolutely. I always say that the more prep work you do, the easier your writing will be. There's nothing worse than getting stuck in your writing and not knowing really which way to go. The more prep work you do, I know it's going to take a while, you know, devote a few hours a day or an hour a day, half an hour a day to just reading and helping getting prepared before you get writing. If you skip those steps, it can be a lot more difficult. However, if that's not how you learn, then you do whatever works best for you. Make sure to explain the variables. Perfect. Yep. Deconstructing the constructs, operationalizing the constructs. Have someone read through the material to make sure there's enough explanation. Perfect. And remember, anybody can be used for this. Your parents, your kids, your friends. It doesn't have to be, quote, someone in the field. And actually, I would argue that would be best that it's not. And that way they don't have background information in which to apply. So you can really see if it's clear or not. I'm assuming it's the same process for smaller short lit reviews, for example, a journal article. Yeah, definitely. So really the difference between this is just the amount of sources you will have. And I always get asked, how many sources should I have? That absolutely just depends on what you're writing and how thorough you need to be. So if you're writing a short assignment and your professor says 5 sources, 10 sources, you know your parameters. But if you're writing a journal article to publish somewhere else, you just include as many sources as you think provides you with enough evidence of what you're writing about. But yeah, I would say that the process is the same. And then any tips on color coding info when reading the sources? Yeah, I know it gets hard. So because you might find so many different themes and so many different codes. Last semester, my classmates and I used NVivo, and that was really helpful in helping code and then find themes and overall findings. So I would say that, you know, talk to your professors and see if there's any tech tools out there, such as NVivo to help. If you're just doing it the old fashioned way, like on your computer or something, make sure you have a code list. Make sure your code list is updated frequently. So that because if you go through and you go, what was blue? Make sure you have a code list as you're going through to help yourself, because otherwise sometimes it gets confusing. Sorry, NVivo is a way to help with your coding and to help with putting all of your sources in one spot. So for USC, this is a great question for librarians, actually. To use and what tech tools can I use? If anybody uses something besides NVivo to help them organize all of their references and to analyze them, please feel free to share in the chat what works best for you. And that way we can have a lot of different tech tools, because I'm definitely not up to date with all of them. Sometimes you have to, perfect, I couldn't edit the slide, okay, but I'm going to focus on non-traditional sources. Great, that's awesome, Susan. And trying a new organizational strategy, maybe chronologically, to show the progression of theory and practice. Love that idea. I am all about using and including non-traditional sources. We want to make sure that we're pushing the boundaries of what's considered to be traditional and accepted. We want to make sure to be challenging those. And then trying a different organizational strategy is awesome. I encourage people to try that out, because chronologically, to show progression of a theory, it can be very, very powerful. And it really, again, depends on what you're researching and what your topic is. But that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Susan. But tips for color coding: make sure you have a code book that you update often, and make sure that as you're going through, to do it in a way where certain information, certain articles, certain ideas can lend themselves to multiple themes. So remember, if something is, you color coded as blue for culture possibly, but it also lends itself to family, you want to make sure that you can use evidence for multiple themes. So whatever works best for you organizationally. Great. So perfect. So it looks like the rest of you all just chatted, which is great. Or maybe you don't have access to the slides, which is, I apologize for. You can always email me for those. And we have a few more minutes left. I've just put my email in the chat. You can always contact me, reach out to me, and see if you have questions. But please also use the Writing Center. The Writing Center, you can send your any pieces of writing to. And the most important part about that is that you give them a heads up of what you need help with. So if you can send the Writing Center your paper and say, hey, I really need help with organization, and they can focus on that. But to end, and I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes, just good luck. And I hope that you don't put too much pressure on yourself. The most important part about this is the relaying of your ideas. So don't get hung up on the technicalities right now with technical writing and things like that. Organize your ideas well, synthesize your sources, and that is what we want to focus on. All of you are already change makers and enacting change and perpetuating social progress through your writing. You're already successful. I want to be the first person to tell you that if nobody else has said that yet. So, eyes open, heads up, you've got this. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, or stay on the line if you have a quick question, just to chat with me. But yeah, thank you so much for coming, you all. Valerie asked, is it bad to cite frequently? No. But remember, we want to cite with parenthetical citations. We really want to stay away from direct quoting a lot. So if you're using a lot of direct quotes, that means, hey, let's rephrase that, put that in our own words, and put a parenthetical citation in instead. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, just stay on the line with me. I'm happy to chat. But have a wonderful evening, everyone. And thank you for making the time out of your day. Pat yourselves on your back. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and it's hard to focus. So congratulations for just showing up. Thanks, everyone. Oh, thanks for that comment, Norma. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Hi, Emily. I'm Bobby. I had a quick question. I was just wondering if maybe you could help me figure out where I can find this, because I know we're done over with this. Do you happen to know what a one-page open source essay proposal is?
A one-page open source essay proposal. So open source to me means that you can pick and choose your sources and how many. But that's just my interpretation of that. Is this an assignment for one of your classes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I would just check with your professor and see what an essay proposal. So it sounds like you're going to be providing your professor with the ideas that you have for an upcoming essay, and your professor will evaluate the ideas of whether or not to move forward. Does that sound like something that you would be doing in your class?
I'm assuming that's what it is, but does it have a specific structure? Because I've Googled it. I've texted and emailed 5 different students in different classes. I asked the GA and she said what you said, but I didn't know if it had a specific structure in the proposal.
You know, I haven't written something like that before, but what I would probably do, just as rule of thumb, is include some like a smaller version of what we were just talking about, like introduce the idea that you want to write about for your essay, provide some reasons, and then add a concluding paragraph. So just kind
Okay.
of organize your one page in a way that is clear, your ideas are connected to one another, and just add an intro and a conclusion. I would go with that. But have you reached
Okay.
out to the professor directly?
No, he said to reach the GAs.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, you know, I would just do your best and see if he has any specific feedback. I would guess that he would be evaluating your ideas more so than the structure of your writing at that point, since it's an essay
Okay.
proposal.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have
Alright.
more specific
Oh
insight. I
no,
don't want to.
nobody had one. And then when I Googled it, it's mostly like a proposal for like some kind of business or tech.
Got it. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would just say, if it's open-ended like that, I would just do a brief intro, some reasons why you're proposing what you're proposing, and summarize it in the conclusion.
Okay. And thank you so much. You just had put everything that's been floating in our brain together and gave me steps to make sure it stays tight. So
Oh,
thank
good.
you.
I'm so happy. Yeah, I know that can be such a difficult part of writing, is just making sure everything's succinct and connected. So I'm so glad
Mhm.
this is helpful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. And thank you for spending a
Yeah.
little time after. And bye,
Oh,
ladies.
yeah.
You have a great night too.
Bye, Bobby. Good luck.
Bye.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Emily. I just wanted, well, aside from thank you, you're always so
This is
you're
like
so
your
on point.
eighth time attending. I'm so happy to see you again.
Always my professor, Emily.
No.
But I just stayed a little extra because I noticed that you did something and I wanted to point out that I noticed it and say good job.
Okay. Oh, okay. Is it the guys thing?
Yeah. I heard you catch yourself and I heard you change it. And it took
Yeah.
me like over a year to change that. I know the
Mhm.
process is difficult and I just wanted you to know
Oh,
that I noticed
goodness.
that
Yeah.
and that's awesome.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you for noticing, because it has been a process of me changing that. So I
Mhm.
appreciate you noticing. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for your time and I will be
Yeah.
off, but I will see you again soon.
Sounds good. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Hey, Tara. Tara, can I help with anything, or are you just hanging out? Okay, well, I'm going to get going, but if you have any questions, you can always message me on GroupMe. And I miss seeing you in class. I hope to talk to you soon. Okay, bye.